That's okay. We're talking about anger. So there's self-centered anger that motivates actions that are hurtful to ourselves or others. We just talked about that one. And life-centered anger that motivates actions that benefit the well-being of ourselves or others. So first, I want to talk a little bit about the life-centered one because that one is, I think, the one we're less familiar with, but also it invites some possibilities around anger. Does anyone remember one of the stories? She shares a couple of stories that are examples of life-centered anger. Does anyone remember one of those stories?
Was the Mothers Against Drunk Driving?
Yeah. That's a great one. Anyone remember the ancient one? I love this story. The samurai, he's got a big sword. My husband teaches Tai Chi. He's got these big swords. The samurai wants to understand heaven and hell. You know, he's one of these students like you and me who are like, I got to understand this. And he goes to the master, and the master says something awful. He says, why should I teach you? You're stupid. Your breath smells. Your teeth are bad. Just all of these insulting things. And the samurai is enraged. He pulls out his sword. I can just imagine his hair kind of flying. And the master says, that, what you're experiencing right now, that is hell. And then you may remember the other side of the story is that the samurai is so deeply touched that the master has put himself in danger in this way because a samurai is like going to use their sword. That's what they do. Um, that he's so touched that he puts down the sword and I'm guessing probably bows. And the master says, that's heaven. Um, and so in that teaching, the master is using a great example of life-centered anger, kind of an outrageous example. But the other example that was given is the teacher of what is her name, Diane Rossetto. Joko Beck is also was also the teacher of Peg Syverson, and therefore a root teacher for our sangha. And so I didn't meet Joko Beck. She was quite elderly when I came to Appamada. But I'm guessing she was a woman about my size. She doesn't look that big in her photos. And she was already elderly, maybe in her 70s, maybe 60s. And Rosetto relates a story that Joko Beck is walking on the beach and she like breaks up this fight between these guys with her anger. And so anger is not in itself bad. So switching now to self-centered anger, which I think is the one that really can trip us up. Um, Rosetto also shares some stories about self-centered anger. Does anyone remember any of those stories? There's a really outrageous one. The guy who's told your wife is having an affair. Do you remember that one? And he climbs up in the tree and he's like, I'm going to get her. I'm going to get her. I'm going to find her. I'm going to catch her in the act. And then, he gets sleepy because, a tree, sleeping in a tree, falls out, makes a fool of himself. And the neighbor says, what are you doing? And the guy says, my wife, she's cheating on me. I'm watching out for her. I'm so mad. And what does the neighbor say? Somebody tell the punchline.
You're not even married.
They're not married.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a ridiculous story, right? But who can identify with that? Where you get so far down the line of your anger, and then suddenly something wakes you up to realize this is a complete waste of time. Like what did I just do? What is this cotton candy story that I have just woven? So a good chuckle from that one, but a bit of self-identification as well. I think it also points to that this self-centered anger can also be really tied to our identity. Someone mentioned how hard it is to let go of anger from the past, anger about past wrongs. Um, and Rossetto uses the word self-indulgent anger. Um, Yikes. Um, which then brings up the question of what beliefs we bring about anger. When we think of other emotions like joy, we may have some thoughts about joy, but anger seems to come with a lot of self stories, like self judgment. So, for example, what I shared, that you just shouldn't be angry. Does anyone else have ideas, having read this chapter or kind of practice with anger, things you've noticed that are beliefs about anger, not about a particular situation, but just about being angry? Beliefs, judgments, messages, whether you still believe them or not, things you've heard. Yeah.
I grew up with my mother always saying, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. And that really, I mean, it's like, okay, it's not okay to get angry. It's not okay to get mad, or at least it's not okay to express them.
Right. It's not okay to express them because you're still going to have the feeling, but you just need to stay quiet. So I think that belief is something like anger isn't welcome here.
I had a I had a situation growing up where one of my parents would actually like try to make me angry, right? Bully and tease and mock, and until I was so angry I would just like cry, and then they would say, oh, it's what do you don't be so silly, right? Why are you so upset? I was only kidding, or this is, you're taking it too seriously, or you need to learn to control yourself. And so I guess I grew up feeling um like anger was weakness on my part. And so I spent a lot of years trying to avoid getting angry. And like you, Robin, that didn't work at all. Because basically I was still angry and then it would just all come out at once. And then it was really, really damaging.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, a lot of times we get the message that it's kind of ironic because anger is so big and scary when it's aimed at you, but that expressing anger is weakness and it's showing a lack of control, which also is a kind of moral weakness. Um, what about, oh, does anyone have any beliefs that they may have heard, had, or still have around what happens if you don't express anger?
Well, I mean, as a therapist, it's very connected to depression.
Mm,
It's a absolute root, ROOT. Um, you know, keeping it in, and vice versa, allowing oneself to acknowledge, I'm really angry. I might feel murderous, or whatever it is, relieves depression also. And also convincing patients that it's a feeling and not an action,
mm,
um, is something else that I've always tried to help with. And I think there are different in society. I think it's different. Men and women are treated differently with their anger. Men who are angry are often considered powerful, and women are considered complainers, and bitches, basically.
right, right. And thank you for in my notes from the book, one of the students says something like, if you don't express your anger, it erodes your insides. And some people will say, oh, there's a whole camp of people out there somewhere who are like, oh, you have cancer because you have unexpressed anger. But I did not. I think maybe I vaguely knew that that was a root cause of depression, but that's fascinating and it makes perfect sense because
Yeah, well, what happens is the anger, it's got to go somewhere, and
right,
it's like a boomerang. It comes back to the self.
right. So so we know that based on what we've talked about, that we want to move through anger. And as the precept is stated, we want to let go of anger. And I know for myself, when I feel angry, I want to let go of it now. And I want someone to kind of do it for me. Like I just want it taken away. Um, yeah, I'll be with you in just a sec, Heather. And so Rosetto tells this wonderful story about, which I could really identify with, of a student going to a teacher and saying, I'm an angry person. I want to get rid of my anger. You can really imagine this, you know, that kind of humble understanding of oneself and clarity that this needs to change. And the teacher says, um, okay, well, show me your anger. And the student, being with the teacher, of course, um, doesn't feel angry right then, which does seem to be the way anger is. You know, it's either there or it's not. There's not like an in between place. And it's hard to call it up when you're not experiencing it. And when you are experiencing it, it's hard to let go of it. Um, so the student says, I can't find it. Um, and then, of course, the teacher says, well, it's gone. You're good. I'm glad I could help you. Um, and I think that story points to me to um, how desperate we are to work through our anger and how painful it is to hold our anger. And yet, like everything, it's temporary, like all emotions. So, Heather, I can we come back to you now?
Sure. I was curious about the link between anger and depression. And I had an experience recently where I was just enraged about something. And while expressing my anger, I sort of devolved into tears. And I was surprised. And of course, I was verbalizing and I'm so angry about the situation. And clearly I was sad about it. Um, Probably because I'd had some insight into the behavior for some time, or the situation that I was unwilling to accept or address for what it was. But I'm also curious from a spiritual perspective and a therapeutic perspective, why do we confuse anger with grief?
Well, I think Rosemary can speak to the psychological perspective. Um, maybe if you want to do that first, Rosemary, just briefly.
Sure. Yeah, so a lot of times angry expression is covering sadness. So yeah, so people that tend to that's like their go-to feeling about a lot of things and reactions with people, it's covering a lot of sadness. So I don't know if that's helpful. But.
And I think where the spiritual comes in, this practice, is being able to, you know, in the moment, we kind of hope that our practice sort of kicks in. And what I think of as our body memory either helps hold us, you know, in a grounded way or minimize how much we express or cause harm. But after the event, regardless of the the extent to which we were successful in mitigating harm to others and ourselves, to be able to, even as painful as it is, because it's over, let's just leave it behind. There is a way that it's helpful to review, either writing in a journal or while you're sitting on the meditation cushion, knowing that you've got a limited amount of time, you don't have to stay here forever, to kind of look at as it sounds like you already are, like realizing, oh, that was sadness, and that like actually kind of relates for me to this other thing. And then to be able to get an understanding about kind of causes and conditions that led to what initially was anger, but then became sadness. I think that's where this practice is. And then I'm curious if you found that once you recognized that your truer emotion maybe was sadness, grief, if the anger, since this precept is about letting go of anger, if the anger let you go.
Yes, it was reduced considerably. I still have some vestiges, but
Yeah. And
it's
so,
not, I'm not ruminating.
right. And so I think that's maybe one thing that's interesting is, the precept is worded the way of letting go of anger, but sometimes it is the way of anger letting us go by, by sitting with it, by examining it, by noticing it. Thank you for sharing that. Also, I wanted to just call out that anger also, I think Rosemary, I can't remember if it was you or not, mentioned, relationship between anger and gender in our culture. There is also a relationship between race and anger. And I have a dear friend who is a Black woman, and the number of times she's been called an angry Black woman, and that she's asked me, because she believes this label, am I an angry Black woman? And I'm like, you don't understand. When people call you that, they just want you to be quiet. It is a way to silence someone with that label. But moving along, the most interesting part of this chapter to me is sort of a good example of bearing the lead. The question to ask when we're angry: what is the requirement that I have that is not being met? Did you guys notice that question? How do I think things ought to be? I'm curious, especially anyone who hasn't shared yet. You don't have to take like the worst thing that ever made you angry. Just could be a simple, silly thing. Can you walk us through an example of that? Someone cuts you off on Mopac, or your coworker sends one too many emails, or
I had one today where I met a friend for dinner, and we went from the park we were at across the street to a place for dinner, and both got out of our cars at the same time. And then I waited at the front door of the restaurant for about a solid 4 or 5 minutes while she got all of her stuff situated on her front seat and did, I don't know, whatever she was doing for quite a long time. And I found myself just getting a little more irritable and a little more angry. And I found myself thinking, I require everybody to move as quickly as I do.
Right.
It's the way life should be, and that's it. Right?
Yeah. I mean, there's an amount of time it takes to get out of a car.
Right.
And that's it. Just, there's not more to it. This is not the time to check your email, do your lipstick, do your hair, whatever. Yeah, that's a perfect example.
Robert,
Yeah.
I know you want to get to the meditation, but I've got an interesting example that actually involves you, that I've not talked to you about. This is just something I noticed one time during one of the morning sits quite a while ago now, sometime last year. Somebody, I won't name names, but it was a he, and he was into this whole thing about smiling. And he's looking at a screen full of mostly women, and he says that we all ought to smile. And okay, so I see Rosemary, she's gritting her teeth. So there's this thing, maybe everybody on this screen doesn't know. You don't tell a woman to smile. It's it's just, it's, anyway. So my anger, and so my question, so here's how you handled it. It was so beautiful. I can't believe how you handled it. There was a little pause, and then you made this beautiful statement about how, sometimes when you ask some people to smile, they may be offended or something. Whatever you said, it was like so smooth, no one even noticed it. But I'm sitting here in my anger thinking, wow, she either didn't feel the anger or she just handled it beautifully. So I guess since that's not really my example so much as yours, but it's the idea of this running thing, the tiny thing here, tiny thing there. What is my expectation? Like Todd wanted people to be faster. Well, I want people to recognize me as an equal. And how do you work with that sort of simmering thing that's constantly going on? I'm sure your Black friend feels it too in double. She's got the double whammy there.
Yeah, well, that's a great segue. I will say thank you for I had completely forgotten that, but once you said smiling, man, that is a hot button issue for me. You don't tell me to smile. But
I didn't know this was a thing.
oh, so many men told me.
As a man, I guess I didn't know this was a thing. So it's men telling women how they should look and act, basically.
No,
Okay.
it's men telling women they need to smile so that they don't feel, well, it goes along with anger, I guess. They don't want to feel threatened in any way. They want this woman to kind of be, dancing backwards in high heels and not be strong.
Docile.
Yeah, and it fits into what Leslie heard as a girl of, if you don't have anything nice to say, so smile. But let's not get off track. But I was not angry in that moment. But thank you for that feedback. I do appreciate it. But what I'd like to do now is actually, you've asked a good practice question. I have this anger. It is related to my expectations around this thing, people taking this amount of time, and respecting my time, people treating me respectfully, and you guys can fill in, your own personal blank. So I will invite you in just a moment to think of a particular example of a situation that brought you anger. And again, it needn't be, the core issue of your childhood. That might be a bit much for this exercise, but I do encourage you to use it if it works for you in the future. So I invite you to return to your sort of meditation seat. If you need to rearrange yourself a little bit, we'll just be here like 10 minutes. But anyway, a seat where you feel grounded, well supported, upright. And when you find that comfort, go ahead and either close your eyes or drop your gaze. If you'd like for this exercise, you can turn your camera off if that makes you feel more comfortable. But I do love your presence. So Thich Nhat Hanh said that when someone says or does something that makes us angry, we suffer. And in the moment of anger, it's hard to see that because we feel so justified in our anger. But we, as the angry one, we too are suffering. We tend to say or do something back to make the other suffer, he says, with the hope that then we will suffer less. The fact is that when you make the other suffer, he or she will try to find relief by making you suffer more. And so there is escalation of suffering on both sides. And here's where he really makes a turn. Both of you need compassion and help. Neither of you needs punishment, neither the angry one or the one who has caused the anger. And Thich Nhat Hanh likens tending to anger, which we're going to do now, to tending to a crying baby. So with that same kind of care and concern, patience, and Lack of judgment. We don't judge a baby who's crying. We want to just find out what's the trouble and comfort the baby. And then finally, Thich Nhat Hanh says that working with anger is like boiling potatoes. It takes as long as it takes. You can't rush it. So now that you're sitting in this upright meditation position, first notice sensations in your body. Your breath, where your body touches the cushion beneath you. Any places of constriction or pain. Places of spaciousness. And places that are just difficult to locate, that kind of feel like nothing. I invite you now to bring to mind someone you love. In this way, we will take care of ourselves before we meet our anger. Thinking of someone you love could be a child, your partner, a friend, someone who's deceased, or an animal companion. Imagine this loved one right here before you. Really feel the love for this other. Notice any changes that happen in your body. Maybe just the beginning of a smile, or some warmth in your chest, or some other sensation. Know that at any time you can return to this peaceful sensation and the presence of this loved one. Now, bring to mind a person or situation that evokes anger in you. It could be something that happened long ago or something from earlier today. Take a moment to gather up some energy around this angry situation. And now, say to yourself, and if you like, because we're all on mute, you can say it aloud. Hello, little anger. Hello, as if you were greeting a friend or a small child. And we'll repeat this, breathing in, hello, little anger. Breathing out, you are welcome here. Breathing in, hello. Breathing out, welcome. Continuing for 8 breaths on your own. Now let go of the counting and be curious. What does your anger look like? Is it big? Is it tiny? What color is it? What does your anger need from you right now? Does it want you to know something? Does your anger request any small movement from you that you can do right now without disturbing others? What does the crying baby of your anger need? How can you care for it right now? Ask your anger if there is anything else it needs from you. Now, bring your awareness back to your breath. Observe the sensations in your body. Note any changes. When you're ready, begin to move your hands and your fingers. Maybe rotate your ankles. Stretch in any way that feels good. Take your time, and when you're ready, you can slowly open your eyes. To end on this topic, we'll check with Todd to see if we have time for sharing. But my last sort of thing to offer is one version of the precepts that I've used. Actually, instead of saying the way I take up the way of letting go of anger, it talks about transforming anger. And I found that very helpful. And Heather, what you shared, resonates with that idea that anger is a kind of energy, and our practice allows us to transform it. And I might even reword that to say our practice allows anger to transform itself, because we stop doing something and the anger changes. But it seems that as long as we're invested in being angry, then we can't transform it, and we can't let it go either. And so I offer that, the idea of the practice of transforming anger. Anger will happen, and our practice allows us to transform anger, or allow for it to be transformed. That's what I have to offer this evening. Todd, I'm going to let you be the keeper of time.
Yeah, we have plenty of time. So if anybody wants to bring any questions up or reflections or concerns, we have time.
Good. I'm curious how that exercise was, the hello little anger thing. Did you find it useful? Was there something surprising? Did you find that you resisted it? What are some of your experiences?
Well, Robin, I thought it was really helpful, actually. I hadn't ever approached my anger that way. And my anger looked like me as a small child. And when you ask the question, what what is your requirement that's not being met, and then while engaging with the anger, you asked us to ask our anger if there was anything more we could do for it. It was very almost immediate sense of relief, because I think just in my case, there's so much shame around anger that the just being able to acknowledge it, it sounds very silly, but just being able to say, this is legit, you are allowed to be angry, um, was kind of great.
I think it's huge. I don't think you should minimize that at all, because I think so much in the way that Leslie, what many of us were taught of, just don't, you're not going to be angry. Anger is not good. You're not going to do that. And so to be able to stop, because of our practice enough, stop doing all the things, thinking all the things, planning all the things, to be able to encounter something that is really forbidden for, especially, I would say, women, but I have not ever been a man. Um, it's pretty profound. So thank you.
I thought it was extremely helpful as well.
Hmm.
Really transformative.
I know that when I was struggling a few years ago and encountered this, this is from a particular Thich Nhat Hanh book. Let me tell you the title of it. It is Anger, Wisdom for Cooling the Flames. And the whole book is in his really precious tone. I think only he could say hello, little anger, without me completely just not agreeing with that. But when I worked with it, so strangely, the image that came, my anger was a red cat, this really electric red cat, and I was to brush it, I think, and huge gobs of hair came out, and it was a situation in which there was nothing for me to do about this anger. Like there was no action to take that would, improve things, which I think is often the case with anger. We have an expectation, it's not met, but there's nothing we can do about it. There was something very oddly helpful to be able to, when I was revisiting and re-experiencing that anger, which took as long as it takes, just like the boiled potatoes, to have this sort of mental exercise to do, that I had this enormous red cat to brush. I remember sharing this with someone, and she immediately had this tremendous pile of stones, and she just needed to move the stones, but they were little stones, and she didn't have to do it all at once. So our imaginations come into play when we can somehow drop all these stories about anger in particular, that it's bad or wrong or forbidden or it's dangerous. It's overwhelming to be able to engage the power of our imagination in a way that's turning towards, because of that question, what do you need? I'm curious, as you guys continue to work with it, if it's helpful for you. Before we turn it over to Todd, I'm curious to hear from one of the guys, because I do think that anger, unlike some of these other precepts, maybe all of them, anger is gendered in our society. Often, I know therapists will say that, women turn trauma inwards and it's depression, men turn it outwards and it's violent behavior. And so that is kind of a socially condoned and maybe also is hormonal. But we've heard a lot from women, so I want to balance that from hearing from some of you guys.
For me, I think it's all, maybe I was different because I was brought up with a lot of girls. All my cousins were girls, but it was like you didn't want to express anger. And in my immediate family, my parents would just, if you could tell if they got angry, they would, instead of saying anything or doing anything, they just go in separate rooms and just internalize it. But I think for me, and I'm trying to deal with how to best deal with anger when it comes up. A lot of times it's just foolish stuff. It's dropping something or hitting myself or or by accident or something. And immediately it's like anger or rage even. I don't want to strike out at anyone, but sometimes I just think I would be better off just yelling. And I'm not sure if that's healthy or not healthy. So for me, it's like, well, if I yell, I'm getting rid of it, and I'm not holding it in, and I'm not building up the tension in my head. But then it comes down to, well, it's like, so sometimes you may want to cry about something, but of course boys don't cry. You're raised with boys, you can't cry. So what do so you can get angry, I guess, but you can't cry. Then I go, well, maybe I can cry or yell and just get rid of it. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that out.
Yeah, join the club on that one. I know that sometimes for me, I feel like my brain can only, in the moment of a situation arising, apparently one's executive function does go offline, so I'm not alone, but I feel like I can only hold like a little tiny bit of wisdom. And I think the two tiny bits of wisdom that are huge, that both of which just continue to shock me with their profoundness in Buddhism, here they are. Just don't cause more harm. Like, no harm. The most basic thing that we're doing here is to not, there's always going to be harm and suffering around us, but to not contribute to it, to not add more of it. So it might be that when you trip over that thing that hangs out from the end of your bed that we all trip over and it hurts like hell, and you want to just yell, if you're home alone, yell. And if there's someone else in the house that could be harmed by your unexplained yelling, then probably another choice. The other piece of wisdom that doesn't relate, oh no, it totally relates to anger, because we just did it, is be curious. Or not knowing mind, but be curious is kind of a more English way to say it. So don't cause harm, be curious.
I also have a related question. Sometimes I feel as though I need to discharge anger physically, like with exercise. Is this common or effective?
Well, for sure. And this is we're out of precept land. There's no doubt that any kind of movement, especially bilateral movement, is really helpful to discharge any kind of large emotions, whether it's sadness or anger. So walking, I used to think it had to be something violent, like hitting pillows or something, but there's a wonderful book, I don't have it in this room with me right now, called Burnout, It's by two sisters. It came out in the last couple of years, and about the idea of how important it is to discharge emotion. And they speak to specifically bilateral movement that involves both sides of the body. So swimming, walking, running, bicycling, drumming, knitting. Probably there are 1,000 other activities. But it doesn't need to be, from what I've read, it doesn't need to be something violent. You don't have to throw dishes, or that would have been news to my mother, or hit pillows. It needn't. It's just discharging it in some way. It needn't be a obviously angry way. Does that make sense? Dancing. And I think that's where taking a moment of stillness and checking in with the body. Sometimes we've been raised to be afraid of our bodies or not trust our body. Like we're supposed to trust our thoughts, but not our body. And with anger, boy, our thoughts can really get going, right? Just start that story going about what we're going to do and what happened and how much, whatever. And so being able to just take a moment and stop and check in with the body enough to know, oh, I need to go for a walk. I need to dance to a loud song. Whatever your thing is. So there is taking up the way of letting go of anger. And remember, please, Thich Nhat Hanh's wonderful metaphor, because I can tell that there's a part of all of us that's like, oh man, I'm going to get this one figured out. I'm going to nail it. And it takes as long as it takes.
Thank you so much, Robin. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
That was great. I appreciate it. So that is letting go of anger. The other thing we had kind of on our syllabus, our extra credit syllabus, is for those that are still trying to make their way through the Dale Wright book, is we were on chapter 5, or the perfection of meditation. I know we don't often get to that book in this class. We focus on Rosetto and some of the other practices, and I'm not going to cover it here. I think it'd be good to end early for once. I always have that goal and never do it. So we'll end early here in a minute or two, but I'll give you a little bit of the book just as some encouragement if you have time to go back and look it over at some point during this month. So as a review, the 6 perfections, or Buddhism and the cultivation of character, really looks at how the Buddhist approach is to realize your freedom and liberation, and that life can be, done haphazardly, or it can be taken on deliberately. And Buddhists recognize that there's a difference between those who embark on self-cultivation and those who don't, and that difference is sizable. It's enormous. It's the difference between enlightened ways of being in the world and unenlightened ways. So the perfections are put forward or understood as particular ideals of human character. And when the Buddha was asked how many bases of training are there for seeking enlightenment, he responded 6: generosity, morality, tolerance, energy, meditation, and wisdom. So there are 6 series of practices or trainings directing one toward enlightenment. So this is my really quick review of where leading up into the book. But they're also both the method and the goal. Generosity is a training. It's also seen as a goal or an endpoint or a fruit of character development. There's a saying in the book that enlightenment just is the path, and the path is enlightenment. or 1 minute of sitting, 1 minute of being a Buddha. That's something else that's you'll often hear. So these paramitas, or perfections, although that's not a great translation, are dimensions of human character most important to enlightenment. So that's the leading up here to chapter 5. So in the first chapters, they've covered generosity, morality, tolerance, energy, and then the 5th is meditation, the perfection of meditation. And the reason I covered, kind of the quick review is because often meditation looks different than the other perfections. Generosity, morality, patience, these all are tolerance. These all seem like character traits. But meditation, we think of as an activity, not a character trait. But the sneaky thing is that being meditative, in other words, someone who's thoughtful, contemplative, imaginative, and calm, being meditative is to possess a set of personal qualities or traits of character. And just like the other perfections, it's can be cultivated through the practice of meditation. So again, each of these perfections are a characteristic or quality of an enlightened person, as well as a specifically designed practice meant to engender that quality. So meditation is a practice that cultivates a meditative approach to life, one that's thoughtful, contemplative, calm, and imaginative. And as the 5th one, this comes after energy, because in the teachings, they recognize that it takes energy and will to, quote, harness the mind with applied mindfulness. It takes energy and will to harness the mind with applied mindfulness. So meditation follows energy as the 5th and is closely linked to it. And in the book, he goes through the 2 kind of traditionally types of meditative practices. The 2 most common you'll hear is shamatha, vipassana. So shamatha is a concentrative practice. Think of early beginners practices of following the breath or counting the breath. They're practices, meditation practices that are designed to train your mind to concentrate into kind of a single pointed focus on something, right? To be able to, this is the training to be able to come back, to keep coming back over and over and see what we're doing. And these shamatha practices will result in what Buddhists call samadhi, or a concentrative state. And there can be many different teachings on levels and types of samadhi that you might hear. And then the other is vipassana, or insight. So we have concentration and we have insight. And they are thought of as 2 wings of the same bird, that it takes both to fly. They help and support each other. And kind of in my thinking, I kind of think of them as they're both co-requisites for each other. They go hand in hand. And then Dale Wright goes into kind of the 3 layers of human awareness, or consciousness, that are seen as kind of 3 different perspectives of consciousness, which sometimes people try and put it in hierarchical order, but they're all required. The first one is direct awareness, or basic awareness of our senses, hearing a sound, seeing a sight, feeling the cushion on your bottom, kind of direct sensory awareness. And we often start practitioners here because our natural human tendency is not to be in this layer of consciousness. We're normally in the 2nd layer, which is reflective thinking. thinking about our situation or our predicament, thinking about the person next to us and why are they so loud. You're not just hearing the sound, you're reflecting on the sound and why are they moving, and aren't we told to sit still, and geez, this sounds just like that other person that asked for chewy last year who was always chewing their gum, or you're reflecting about all of the input that's coming into you. So this second layer is where we normally spend a lot of our human energy and time. And so in Buddhism, we often bring people back to training in direct awareness, to try and exercise that muscle to get us out of just reflective thinking all the time. Direct awareness is one, and then reflective thinking is the second. And then reflexive consciousness is the third layer, the consciousness that is aware of our own mind. An awareness that we're thinking, an awareness that we're reflective and we're spinning. The issue with this third layer is there's no higher level to be able to step outside of it and observe it. Right? Whatever consciousness steps back to observe who is aware is the awareness itself. And there's no place you can stand outside of yourself to see this fully and directly. So it's a really good chapter on meditation, on what the trainings or the perfections of meditation or jhanas are all about. And I think people will find it helpful. So if you have some extra time, this is a good Dale Wright chapter to dig into, chapter 5, the perfection of meditation. But with that little tantalizing bit of it, I will leave you to read it on your own if you feel like, and we will end early tonight. So thank you for your time and your presence. We're almost 3/4 of the way through the year, if you can believe it already. And pretty soon we'll start talking about the Precepts ceremony for those that might be interested in that and what that means, and as we finish out our year. Any final questions or comments before we wrap up? No? Okay, thank you again, Robin, for joining us. It was so good to see you and have your voice here. Thank you.
Thank you all for your practice.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Class was so helpful.
Good.